So now you're going to get in the time machine. We're going to go backwards because we're going to talk now about where the experts still are with a lot of these problems. And as we go through that, even as I'm giving the suggestions that all the experts say we should be doing, in your own mind, be using Elliott's grid. Is this a weak solution or is this a strong solution? And unfortunately, most of the solutions proposed by experts are relatively weak. And yes, it is just going to be the current expert opinions. Because if you look back through the literature, and Karen sort of alluded to this, there really are only 2 randomized controlled trials in the literature of what makes anesthetic medication administration safer. Both of them come from Alan Mary, and both of them revolve around his, as Karen said, his entire package or bundle of medication safety. So it was a multimodal system. He did it first in real life, and then just recently has done it in a simulated setting. So he calls this entire bundle SAFERSleep, and it actually comes as a machine. He's from New Zealand, so we've had poor penetration of this around the world. But really it had customized drug trays, purposefully designed drug trolleys, trays to get to Elliott's, really well-organized drug trays, and then a well-organized top of the cart, including a tray for unusual medications, so they were always kept separate. Even back in 2011, using a lot of pre-filled syringes, whether from the pharmacy or from commercially. Color-coded drug labels, and then perhaps more important than anything else, the barcode reader. And it was linked to a computer so that when you scan a syringe, you both get a splash screen on the monitor that announces the drug and the concentration, and it speaks the name aloud. So you're utilizing 2 senses as opposed to just the visual. And in that study, they were able to reduce the overall mean rate of drug errors per 100 administrations, not cases, but drug administrations, from 11 administrations, 1 in 11, down to 1 in 9.1. And that was significant. It was 1,000 different anesthetics, used a multitude of anesthesiologists. So this was pretty good data. And then he repeated that in the simulation center, and because now it was simulation, they were able to put error traps into it. So they purposefully put the wrong syringe or the wrong vial into a differently labeled compartment. And here they did even better. So the new system, really the SAFERSleep system, gave them an error rate of 6 in 100 versus exactly what they had seen in their previous study of 1 or 11 in 100. But that's pretty much it. Andrew Bodle has done a longitudinal study that also looked at implementation of a barcode system. Again, positive results. But this is pretty much it for what we call the gold standard of randomized controlled trials. Other than that, it's mostly expert opinion. And Jensen, again, under Alan Mary's guidance, undertook a review of the literature. And they looked at 98 articles. They included quite a few case reports. And they assigned points based on quality. So any sort of scientific design would get you higher points than, say, just a recommendation drawn from a case report. And they came up with 1 general recommendation and 5 specific ones. And while I love Alan and think that this was a great study, that first recommendation isn't really that helpful. Employ countermeasures to counteract errors. You need something a little bit more specific for most of us. So they did give some specific ones. You have to read the label, weak or strong, weak. Labels should be legible, of course. Every syringe has to be labeled, formal organization of the cart and drawers, and then labels checked with a second person or device. None of us have a second person in the OR to check a label with, so it's going to have to be the device. So that was in 2004. We decided to repeat it and see what has changed, how the experts have updated. We again did a review of the literature, 186 articles, and we came up with 74, a slightly different number because we excluded all case reports unless the recommendations in the case report came from a panel of experts or it was really a unique recommendation. And we again awarded points, 8 for a scientific study, 4 for case series. Now understand that the case series could have been thousands of critical incidents that had been reported, but because they were all voluntary reporting, we put them as being nothing more than just a large series of case reports. And then we also looked at published guidelines or recommendations. The first 3 there are really just at the level of recommendations, and then the latter 3 are true guidelines. And we took a look at all of them, and this was my spreadsheet, fairly detailed. But you can see here, here's one recommendation where a lot of the experts mentioned it. And so we took all of that, we awarded points over here, and then we added up all of the points. And we came, and this is sort of just a closer look at what that looked like. And you can see here, this relates to your case, your CART organization. And a lot of the experts recommended that. And here's sort of what we came up with, and we were really surprised. We expected the #1 recommendation to be label every syringe, and it wasn't. It was around culture, and that an incident or error reporting system be in place, adjust culture so that people can report errors, we can understand how people make errors, and it can be different at every institution because the local culture is different. So that's key. And then certainly #2, every medication labeled. Some of these seem pretty simplistic. It should be so obvious, but we still have cases in the literature of someone drew up an emergency drug, gave some of it, put it on the back cart, and then an error was made. And so I'm not going to go into every one of these recommendations. You can certainly get the article and look through them, but you will see that a lot of these tend to be fairly vague. Care taken to avoid, what would that look like? To avoid purchasing lookalikes. Certainly having pharmacy heavily involved, and that pharmacy does all compounded and diluted medications rather than anyone preparing them in the room by themselves. Fair bit, how do we use our electronic health record more usefully to give us alerts, weight-based limits, cognitive aids, and then having specialized carts with protocols. And then again, the cart inventory. I think Elliot's done a nice job of how we can do some of these things in a very formal way to reduce our normal slips and errors, the skill-based errors. None of these get at judgment errors, diagnostic errors, or prescribing errors. Medication administration. Asepsis is starting to crop up. It wasn't there as little as 10 years ago. And identify route of administration. I'm a huge proponent of the new ISO guidelines. How many have in your hospital implemented either a near fit, which is the neuraxial system, or the, what's the, N, it's EN, NFIT, for enteral feedings. Anybody have them yet? So these are unique connectors, no longer based on the lure system. You cannot any longer, with a near fit, put a IV onto an epidural. But they've had a difficult time producing enough of these. We don't have them yet either. And so just end with, here are some of the things that I think might have more impact. It's really hard to say which of these has more usefulness. I know when we were going through the 186, virtually out of the 8 of us that were working on the paper, one of us had an example of an error that would have prevented for every one of our recommendations. But certainly, this is where we should be focused. I think barcode scanning should be mandatory. I'm a little discouraged because even in Ellen's study and in Andrew Bodle's study, barcodes available, people just chose not to use them. And in Ellen's study, barcodes available, the resident reached into the drawer, thought he was pulling out doxapram, it was dobutamine, and he gave 5 cc's of concentrated dobutamine. So barcode scanning, not just a technical solution, but we're going to have to adapt to it. And of course, I always go back to the APSF guidelines. You can find them here, or I should say consensus recommendations. You can find them there. And if you want a copy of the slides, I'm happy to send them out to you. So thank you. And now Ken's going to tell us a better way, hopefully.